The origins of Proto-Semites. Where is the best place of the origins for Proto-Semites? We covered the many origins of Proto-Semites, mainly the Horn of Africa, Eastern Sahara, North Africa, and the Levant with the Natufians. The Semitic family is a member of the larger Afro-Asiatic family, all of whose other 5 or more branches have their origin in North Africa or the Maghreb. Largely for this reason, the ancestors of Proto-Semitic speakers were originally believed by some to have first arrived in the Middle East from North Africa, possibly as part of the operation of the Saharan pump around the late Neolithic. This was in red. In green, it says Dankoff sees Semitic originating between the Nile Delta and Canaan as the northernmost branch of Afro-Asiatic. In blue, it reads, Bench even wonders whether the highly divergent Greg languages indicate an origin in Ethiopia, with the rest of Ethiopic Semitic a later back migration. And in yellow it reads, according to Christy G. Turner II, there is archaeological and physical anthropological reason for a relationship between the modern Semitic-speaking populations of the Levant and the Natufian culture. So as you can see on the image to the left, or to the right, the various places where Afro-Asiatic and where Semitic could have originated from. And as we see from the readings that we just read, in red, there's a North African origin. In green, there is a now between the Nile Delta and Canaan origin. And in blue, a Ethiopian or Horn of Africa origin. And in yellow, a Levantine Natufian origin. But from an academic point of view, which one is the best? This is what we're going to find out today, using an Old Earth model. Remember what the Old Earth perspective is. Old Earth creationism, also known as OEC, is a form of creationism which includes day-age creationism, gap creationism, and progressive creationism. Broadly speaking, OEC, Old Earth creationism, occupies a middle ground between young Earth creationism, YEC, and theistic evolution, TE. Now, if you want to learn more about Old Earth creationism, I actually have a video that deals with Old Earth creationism and even young Earth creationism. But if you want a more deeper understanding of what it means, I have a playlist that deals with a very in-depth understanding of Old Earth creationism from various academics in the Abrahamic faith. But check these videos out for a more deeper, in-depth understanding. Again, this is in my playlist, Old Earth Creationism, as it is titled, and this will help you understand a little bit more about it. So we know that Semites are Afro-Asiatic people. We also know most Afro-Asiatics are haplogroup E. As we said before, Afro-Asiatic, of or relating to or being a family of languages widely distributed over southwestern Asia and Africa, including Semitic, and Semitic, of relating to or consisting a subfamily of the Afro-Asiatic language family that includes Hebrew. And of course, the Israelites, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, all the way to Shem, they are a Semitic people. And we know, according to this journal from Human Journal of Human Genetics, this paper says the Proto-Afro-Asiatic group carrying the E-P2 mutation may have appeared at this point in time and subsequently gave rise to the different major population groups including current speakers of the Afro-Asiatic languages and pastoralist populations. This was from Y chromosome E haplogroups, their distribution and implication to the origin of Afro-Asiatic languages and pastoralism. Therefore, this study will focus on haplogroup E as the marker of Semitic people. Therefore, our goal is to establish why haplogroup E is Proto-Semitic. This is important because Y DNA haplogroups are passed down from father to son. The genealogy of Israel is also passed down from father to son, just like a haplogroup would. As we know in Genesis chapter 11, this is the genealogy of Shem. Shem was 100 years old and begot Arphaxad 2 years after the flood. After he begot Arphaxad, Shem lived 500 years and begot sons and daughters. And then from Genesis chapter 11, 10 through 26, it reads, Arphaxad, Shelah, Eber, Peleg, Ru, Serg, Nahor. Now Terah lived 70 years and begot Abraham. This is a complete genealogy of a male lineage going back to Abraham to Shem. And this fits exactly with a haplogroup. Paternal haplogroups. The paternal haplogroup relates to your Y chromosome, and since that is the sex determining chromosome for men, it is passed down from father to son. As women don't have a Y chromosome, they will not have a paternal haplogroup by default. However, they are able to find out what their paternal haplogroup is if a male relative from the father's side, ideally a brother, father, uncle, or grandfather, is also tested. But the main thing you need to keep in mind is this: the paternal haplogroup relates to your Y chromosome. And since that is the sex determining chromosome for men, it is passed down from father to son. Just like the genealogy, going from Shem all the way down to Abraham, from Abraham all the way down to Isaac, a perfect male line lineage. Furthermore, our goal is to figure out the best likely genotype of Proto-Semites, as well as the point of origin from whence they originated. And again, this is from an old Earth perspective. With all that being said, let's begin. Basal Eurasians. Basal Eurasians. Basal Eurasians is an ethnic lineage which exists in greatest amount among ancient Near Eastern individuals. They had African-related tools in Arabia, hence they may have settled in the Levant or Arabia. The areas of the Near East where Basal Eurasians resided may have been areas where contact with Neanderthals, who were known to have lived in West Eurasia, were not made. So here's a map of the Basal Eurasians, I can see right here. And so the genetic basin of this area around the Gulf is subplanetary basin and a potential source of Basal Eurasian origin. It has been suggested by recent genomic studies, including Almir at 2021 study and Fernander at 2021 study. As you can see, the Basal Eurasian homeland would have been right here in the Persian Gulf, as well as in Oman. So, possible location of the first human group bearing Basal Eurasian ancestry. For the new study by Fernand at 2021, the map shows the main human migration out of Africa, OOA, out of Africa, which followed either a north route, the blue arrow, / or a southern route, which is the red arrow. So here's a closer image of that. So the Basal Eurasian potent that appeared in the Ibero-Maurusian and Natufian as a result of a relationship in the yellow zone. Perhaps the gene flow between the two continents was stronger in the north, represented by the two-way arrow, blue arrow, than in the south, as you can see right here. Here's a closer image. So now let's actually read and understand where the Basal Eurasians come from. The paper we're about to read is a recent one from 2021. It's called Projecting Ancient Ancestry in Modern-Day Arabians and Iranians, a Key Role of the Past Expose Arabo-Persian Gulf on Human Migrations. And so it reads, the highest levels of Basal Eurasian lineage found in East Arabio-Persian reinforced, AP by the way means Arabo-Persian, reinforce previous genetic and archaeological evidence of early human settlement in the exposed basin of the Arabo-Persian Gulf. Thus, the exposed basin of the Arabo-Persian Gulf is a possible homeland of Basal Eurasians. So here is another map showing where Basal Eurasians would have been, basically near the Persian Gulf in the Middle East. Basal Eurasians seem to have first appeared in the region of the Persian Gulf near Iraq, Iran, and Oman, but a group of them migrated to the Levant/North Africa. What would the Y-DNA haplogroup of these Basal Eurasians be? Also, the ancient Ibero-Maurusians specimens could be in part descendants of Basal Eurasians, as they have a shared genetic affinity with early Paleocene Near Easterners, best proxy for the Natufians, and 1/3 of input from sub-Saharan Africans, a mixture between West and East Africans. Thus, so far, southwestern Asia is still the most plausible homeland for the hypothetical Basal Eurasian population. So here is a map showing the Basal Eurasians, as you can see, ancient Middle Easterners, basically in the Middle East. And so this paper, Origins of Human Ancestry, it says, the origins of Basal Eurasian ancestry most likely centered around Southwest Asia and North Africa, and are unlikely to be connected to evidence of humans further away from Africa before 60,000 years ago. The scenario of a non-Neanderthal-admixture, non-Neanderthal-admixed modern human population, which is basal to other Eurasians and resided in Africa, is plausible. In particular, North Africa is a strong candidate as a location for the emergence of Basal Eurasians, as it shares notable connection with Eurasia. Natufians, who share craniometric affinity with North Africans or Sub-Saharan Africans, and were of the Y-chromosomal haplogroup E, which likely originated in Africa, are of Basal Eurasian ancestry. Basal Eurasians had little to no Neanderthal admixture. The area of the Near East where Basal Eurasians resided was the Arabian Peninsula, from where haplogroup E spread to the Near East and North Africa. There was no contact with Neanderthals in the Arabian Peninsula, as it was outside the Neanderthal range, which explains why Near Easterners carry significantly less Neanderthal ancestry than Europeans. Haplogroup E is the Basal Eurasian haplogroup, based on its frequency in the Middle East at 10%, in northern Europe at 1%. The Bedouin are the descendants of the earliest split from Basal Eurasian populations, with the highest frequency of haplogroup E-M123 at 24.3%. The Natufians, 50% Basal Eurasian, carried E-Z830, an ancestral clade of E-M123. A Saudi Arabian study found that Y-chromosome DE-Yap star originated in the Arabian Peninsula, which served as an imprimatur for the early diversification of non-African haplogroups. This study, Genomic Insight into the Origin of Farming in the Near East, reads, craniometric analysis have suggested an affinity between the Natufians and populations of North or Sub-Saharan Africa as a result that finds some support from Y-chromosome analysis, which shows that the Natufians and successor Levantine Neolithic populations carried haplogroup E of likely African origin, which has not been detected in other ancient males from West Eurasia. The Basal Eurasians that resided in the Levant and North Africa would have had haplogroup E. These Basal Eurasians would represent a back to Africa migration of haplogroup E, and therefore haplogroup E is Basal Eurasian in origin. And if this is the case, then what are the indigenous African haplogroups? A new study concluded that there was a massive migration of non-African Eurasians back into Africa about 70,000 years ago, spreading the Eurasian haplogroups, such as E and its parent DE within Africa, before additional waves of Eurasian admixture. Modern Africans, thus, are descendants of Paleo-Africans and Eurasians, or should I say Afro-Asians, or Afro-Sans, which merged in Africa between 70,000 years to 40,000 years ago. Here's the paper that actually deals with it, called Ancient Admixture in Africa from the Ancestors of Non-Africans. And here's a map showing Basal Eurasians or ancestral West Eurasians migrating into Africa, taking the haplogroup E marker into Africa. And so it reads, frequency of Y DNA haplogroup E in modern populations and hypothetical migration route from its ancestor clade DE in Southwest Asia, the Middle East. Haplogroup E arrived in Africa about 77,000 years ago and diversified in the Horn of Africa. It arrived together with specific West Eurasian alleles and later also diffused into various Paleo-African populations, as well as among ancient North Africans, also known as ANA, which were an population indigenous to North Africa and distinctly related or ancestral to modern Eurasians. Haplogroup E and DE have a Middle Eastern origin. Again, haplogroup E and DE have a Middle Eastern origin. Haplogroup E migrated into Africa as part of a mass migration of Basal Eurasians, ancestral West Eurasians, and then diffused and diversified within Africa, specifically the Horn of Africa, Northeast Africa. Haplogroup DE next to CF, where the Basal Eurasian lineage, which expanded from the Middle East. The common ancestral Y-DNA atom is suggested to have originated somewhere in the Middle East or the Iranian plateau. Massive Eurasian migration and following admixture created the many different African populations of today and are the reason for the high genetic diversity observed in sub-Saharan Africa. In other words, modern African people, sub-Saharan Africans, formed from indigenous Paleo-African groups and intense and intrusive Afro-Asians, Basal Eurasians, and ancient North Africans. Finally, there is the fact why haplogroup E is dominant among non-hunter-gatherers in Africa, and it is within the Eurasian clade DE, while indigenous African hunter-gatherers belong to haplogroup A, A00, and B. So from this paper, what we read is that Basal Eurasians are the haplogroup E individuals that migrated into Africa, and haplogroup E and DE originated in the Middle East, and that the indigenous Africans who are African hunter-gatherers are haplogroup A and B. Paleo-Africans will be haplogroup A and B. Basal Eurasians will have haplogroup E. We're ancient Middle Eastern populations. It's the simplest way to put it. And here is actually a paper that shows the various old markers of haplogroup A and B that we find in sub-Saharan Africa. Here's actually a closer image so you can see. Basically, it will be among, as I said, hunter-gatherer groups, pygmies and Khoisanes and people of that nature. Here's actually a paper that deals with haplogroup A and B and how it was all over Africa, deep paternal genetic roots in Africa from Scolzieri. A 2014 study shows that the old North African groups were A1A, A1B, A3B2, and possibly B1. You actually had a lot of haplogroup A and B all throughout Africa, even in North Africa. And the study to the right says ancient West African foragers in context of African population history. This paper actually shows that some of the oldest African haplogroups in West Africa are A and B markers. So even West Africa had a lot of A and B. And here's a map showing haplogroup A and its different frequencies in different parts of the continent of Africa. As you can see, A is still prevalent in Africa. It just depends on the population and the region. Same thing with haplogroup B. It is still present in Africa. It's not gone, and it is high in various parts and among various certain ethnic groups within Africa. That being said, again, haplogroup E invaded Africa, originally coming from the Near East. This is why haplogroup E is considered to be an Afro-Mediterranean haplogroup, whereas haplogroup A and B is considered to be Paleo-African, basically indigenous African or autochthonous. And as you can see on this map, haplogroup E came into Africa from North Africa and began to push haplogroup A and B people to the south into sub-Saharan Africa. And here is a literal chart showing how haplogroup A and B are African, are like true African, whereas haplogroup E is more of an Afro-Mediterranean or Afro-Middle Eastern type of haplogroup. So Basal Eurasians, North Africa, or the Levant. If Basal Eurasians were in North Africa, then their descendants would become the Proto-Afro-Asiatics. This paper will literally prove this. It is The Origins of Afro-Asiatic by Christopher Ehret, S.O.Y. Kita, Paul Newman, Peter Bellwood, and other authors. So it reads, a careful reading of Denkoff shows his continuing adherence to a long-held position of an exclusively African origin for the family. He explicitly describes Proto-Afro-Asiatic vocabulary as consistent with non-food producing vocabulary and links it to pre-Neolithic cultures in the Levant and in Africa, south of Egypt, noting the latter to be older. Denkoff does revise his location for the common Semitic homeland, moving it from entirely within Northeast Africa to areas straddling the Nile Delta and Sinai, but continues to place the origins of the 5 other branches of Afro-Asiatic languages family wholly within Africa. One interpretation of the archaeological data supports a pre-food producing population movement from Africa into the Levant, consistent with the linguistic arguments for a pre-Neolithic migration of pre-Proto-Semitic speakers out of Africa via Sinai. If Basal Eurasians were in the Levant, then their descendants would become the Natufians. Afro-Asiatic is, and by the way, this paper is called Farmers and Their Languages, the First Expansion. This is from Jared Diamond and Peter Bellwood from Science Magazine. And it says Afro-Asiatic. This language family consists of 6 branches, 5 including ancient Egyptian, confined to North Africa, 1 Semitic, also extending in ancient times to Southwest Asia. That distribution suggests an African origin for the family, whose Semitic branch might then have spread into Southwest Asia. But the overwhelming archaeologically attested flow of domesticated crops and animals from Neolithic times onward into Egypt and throughout the Arabian Peninsula into Ethiopia is out of Southwest Asia rather than out of Africa. That would make it surprising for Semitic languages to have spread against that stream. There are 2 principal competing hypotheses for the origin of Afro-Asiatic. One based on reconstruction of early vocabulary for cultural and environmental fragments, places the homeland in the Levant during the earliest Neolithic, the late Neolithic culture, 9,500 BC. This, with a subsequent 2 prolonged spread by 5000 BC, that is well documented archaeologically. Mixed farming across the Nile into Egypt and North Africa, giving rise to the Egyptian and Berber branches of Afro-Asiatic languages, and sheep and goat-based pastoralism from Western Arabia across the Red Sea into Ethiopia and Sudan, giving rise to the Cushitic, Omotic, and Chadic branches. Semitic spread into Ethiopia much later. That Southwest Asian origin would now be masked by languages replacement in the homeland, including the spread of Semitic branch of Afro-Asiatic languages, including Akkadian or Babylonian, Aramaic, and Arabic in historic times. So whether Basal Eurasians and their descendants were in North Africa or the Levant, Proto-Afro-Asiatics would have emerged from these regions. And this is basically what I'm showing and proving, that the Basal Eurasians, when they went into either the Levant or North Africa, either way, both locations would have brought forth Proto-Afro-Asiatics, North Africa and the Levant. Again, as I always read when it comes to this source dealing with Semitic languages, the Semitic family is a member of the larger Afro-Asiatic family, all of whose other 5 or more branches have their origin in North Africa or the Maghreb. And reading down below in yellow, according to Christy G. Turner II, there is an archaeological and physical anthropological reason for a relationship between the modern Semitic-speaking populations of the Levant and the Natufians. Again, North Africa and a Levant both work. Conclusion. The 2 of the best scenarios for the origins of Proto-Semites is either Northern Africa or the Levantine Natufians. No matter where Proto-Semites came from, they would still have basal North African Ibero-Maurusian DNA. If Semites came from Natufians, they would still carry this North African DNA because Natufians also had this North African DNA. Therefore, modern Semitic populations still carry this Ibero-Maurusian DNA. Therefore, I would say that basal North African DNA can be an indicator of Proto-Semitic ancestry. Also, haplogroup E from a paternal lineage found among ancient Levantine populations is the best candidate for the Y DNA of Proto-Semites, since Semites expanded from the Levant and descend from PPNB Levantine Natufian populations, and that they had only haplogroup E. Again, East Arabians also displayed the highest levels of the Basal Eurasian lineage of all tested modern populations. Not surprisingly, East Arabians were also the ones with higher similarity with Ibero-Maurusians, who were so far the best proxy for the Basal Eurasians among known ancient specimens. Our results are our results are strong evidence to include the posited basin of Arabo-Persian Gulf as possible homeland of the Basal Eurasians to be investigated further on, namely by searching ancient Arabian human specimens. And the Natufians consisted of 61.2% Arabian and 21.2% Northern African. There goes your Northern African. And 10.9% Western Asian and 6.8% Omotic ancestry. And keep in mind that Northern African would likely be Ibero-Maurusian, ancient Northern African, because Natufians are ancient people themselves. And such a scenario would also explain the presence of Y-chromosome haplogroup E in the Natufians and Levantine farmers, a common link between the Levant and Africa. Again, the two most likely origins for Semites, North Africa or the Levant. The Semitic family is a member of the larger Afro-Asiatic family, all of whose other 5 or more branches have their origin in North Africa or the Maghreb. Largely for this reason, the ancestors of Proto-Semitic speakers were originally believed by some to have first arrived in the Middle East from North Africa, possibly as part of the operation of the Saharan pump around the late Neolithic. That's the North African origin. Now for the Levant origin. According to Christy G. Turner II, there is an archaeological and physical anthropological reason for a relationship between the modern Semitic-speaking populations of the Levant and the Natufians. The Levant and North Africa are the two best origins for Proto-Semites. Remember, our goal is to figure out who are the ancient Israelites and their descendants today. Since the Israelites are an Afro-Asiatic Semitic people, we have to know the origins of Proto-Semites. Proto-Semitic populations would be the ancestors of the Israelites. And this is what we found out today. The two most best origins for the ancestors of the Israelites. North Africa or the Levant with the Natufians. As the genealogy goes, Israel are from Shem. They are Semitic. Their ancestors, Proto-Semites. And here is even the distribution of ancient Semitic and modern Semitic people. According to an old Earth perspective, the two best locations for the origins of Semites would be North Africa and Levant Natufians. Cannot stress this enough. With that being said, when it comes to the genome of Proto-Semites, the Israelites, and Israel's descendants, I expect to find a people with 1. Basal North African DNA. They should have some type of North African DNA. Since 1, if they're coming from North Africa, then obviously they're going to have North African DNA. But 2, if they're coming from Natufians, the Natufians themselves had ancient North African DNA. So we should see Basal North African DNA. And we even see it in modern Middle Easterners today. The second thing we should find is Neolithic Levantine / Natufian DNA. This is something that Semites should have. Modern people who claim to be from Israel should have. We see Neolithic Levantine DNA in modern Middle Easterners. And if the Proto-Semites, if they came from North Africa, they have to pass through the Levant where they would obtain Neolithic Levantine DNA. But if Semites originate from Natufians themselves, then obviously they would have this Neolithic Levantine Natufian DNA. So look for Natufian DNA. That's one thing that we'll be looking for. And of course, Y chromosome haplogroup E. As we've seen many times over and over again, most linguists and geneticists do allude to the idea, to the fact that haplogroup E is a Proto-Semitic marker. It is a Semitic marker of ancient or ancestral or old Semitic populations. We see it if Semites were coming out of North Africa or if Semites were even coming from the Levant. E would have been present. So when it comes to finding out the genome, again, the genome of Proto-Semites, the Israelites, and Israel's descendants, look for basal North African DNA, Neolithic Levantine / Natufian DNA, and Y chromosome haplogroup E. This is for the Semitic side.